Closed out my 26-year working full-time in media production as primarily a director of photography. If I include my time working part-time jobs and freelancing various crew positions while I was in school, I'm well over 30 years in this dysfunctional business. Weekly, I receive variations on this question. Do you think the future of the industry is bright? Well, I don't know. It's complicated. I don't necessarily have any more insight than anybody else other than to reflect on my past and say, there's still going to be jobs there. They're just going to be different, similar but different to what we have now. Just looking back on my past, when I was in high school and in college, I worked part-time in television, and most of those jobs that I had that were paid no longer exist. I was a machine room technician at a production facility in Boston while I was in college. I did a lot of videotape duplication to VHS cassettes, and I was also doing broadcast duplication, so cloning shows from like D1 to D2 videotape, or we would record out and duplicate broadcast television spots from a digital Betacam cassette master to 1-inch analog Type C reel-to-reel videotape. I worked as a local TV studio camera operator for different local cable and broadcast stations. All that's automated for the most part now. Maybe the one exceptions are like your soap operas in New York and Los Angeles, and sitcoms in LA still have pedestal cam ops. I worked for a while as a video encoding and standards conversion tech. So running videotape signals through rack-mounted analog and digital signal processing standards converters. Many years supplementing my camera work as an editor and motion graphics and After Effects. A lot of infographics content for corporate companies. Did a lot of pharma and tech startups in Silicon Valley. There's still some of that work, but nowhere near the volume that existed 15 years ago. And my very first job in media, I was like 10 or 11 years old. I delivered newspapers for 4 years, worked 7 days a week after school in my neighborhood. I got to map it. It was probably about 3 miles, and we lived in the center of the route. Did it on my bike after school, Monday through Friday, and Saturday and Sunday were morning paper. The Sunday papers were always massive, filled with all the ads, and I used to beg for a ride from my folks Sunday mornings. Most days they give me a ride, but sometimes they didn't. I'd have to circle back to the house multiple times because I couldn't carry the whole route in one trip. And I imagine it's totally illegal now for a big media company to hire an 11-year-old. I was grateful for the work, and it's unfortunate. I wish we had more stuff like that. I think I lost more money than I made because I was also responsible for all the bill collecting. I'd get an invoice from the paper company, I think every 2 weeks, and I was supposed to be collecting, initially it was $2.10 a week from each of my customers, but they're all like families with jobs. When I'm delivering the paper at 3 p.m, no one's home. So I was hopelessly behind on my bookkeeping. The district manager would come by to collect the payment on the invoice, and I'd be out delivering papers, and sometimes just like hoping he wouldn't see me hiding behind cars because I didn't have the money to pay him. I'm grateful that I got that painful lesson of billing, bookkeeping, keeping up on bills in my youth, because once I started my own business, I didn't want to relive any of that trauma, and ever since I've had my finances squared away. All right, jumping into data from the last couple of years. Billable days worked as a independent director of photography, owner operator with camera gear out in the field. I'm not doing any post-production. So this is just billable time that's one of two things. It's a package rate or gear and labor day, billable day in the calendar, or it's a travel day at a reduced rate, or maybe it's labor only, no gear. To recap, 2021, which was my first full year in Texas, didn't have too many client contacts here, and I spent a lot of time traveling back to Southern California to fill out previous obligations. If I was traveling back to SoCal, uncompensated on the travel side, I didn't include it in the tally. So in 2021, 100 billable days. 2022, getting a little more established in Texas, while still also doing a lot of travel back to California, 128 billable days. 2023, I scaled back radically on the California business, handed off several clients to other owner ops. So 2023 was a little lighter and 113 billable days. 2024, I went into it with the attitude of, I don't need to work 120 or 13 days. I'm okay doing a little bit less to have more time to focus on my physical fitness, family, downtime. So I was like, all right, I'm going to set a goal of 100 billable days in 2024. And if it comes in below that, it's fine. I'm happy with it. And as it worked out, largely attributed it to it being an election year. Presidential election years are always odd for me and kind of the freelancers in my circle. Clocked 132 days. And I thought I'd break it down a little bit more into quarters. So Q1, 25 days, Q2, 54, Q3, 33, and Q4, 20. Things dropped off radically in Q4, and I attribute it fully to it being close to the November election. It's like all my corporate business and corporate clients went quiet. I think everyone in corporate marketing is like holding their breath to see who's going to end up in the White House and how that's going to affect business policy the coming years. Percentage of total revenue by customer. So the number one customer represented 37% of total sales. Number two came in at 24%. Number three, 12%. And the fourth at 7%. And then it tapers off from there. Going back about 20 years in my career, I had one annual contract client and they represented 50 to 80% of my annual income. And they kept me about that busy too in the calendar, but I always was terrified of the year that the contract wouldn't renew. I would be struggling to replace like 80% of my income with a new client. When that relationship concluded after many, many years, I kind of went to the other extreme and I wanted to get to the point where no one customer represented more than about 10% of my annual sales. And I got there for several years, and a lot of it was attributed to working on TV commercials and like broadcast promos. All of that was through agencies and production companies. And you're very much like the flavor of the week or the subcontractor fresh creative. Like if the campaign's a huge success or neutral or bombs, none of those outcomes seem to really guarantee they would call you back on the next one. It was more like I'm in the rotation. So you do a good job and then they want to go a different direction. They bring in a different DP on the next one with the same client. And then they'll come back to you in 6 months to a year. So in like 2015, 16, 17, 18, I was hitting that like 10 to 15% per customer for like my top maybe 5. And you can refer back to some of my past vlogs that get into that in a more granular nature. Now that I'm out of that agency world, it just hasn't been that way. And, I've done a lot of coverage here in South Texas related to immigration and the border the last couple of years, which has affected just availability in the calendar. I'm out doing border coverage, so I've had to turn away some other corporate work. But now I'm just kind of fine with it. I'm really enjoying getting back to my roots. I started in E&G and getting back to it now. It's a lot more enjoyable when I did it the first time. Now that I've done all these other verticals of production, I appreciate the solo contributor aspect of doing E&G far more than I did in my early 20s. 2023 sales percentages, very similar to 24. Do a little split screen overlay to compare. So this does make me nervous. I'm grateful for the additional work, but number one now is getting awfully close to being at that 50% mark of total revenue. But I will say I'm grateful for all of that work that came in, and I declined a decent amount of other offers to go shoot because I was already booked with my number one customer. So one of the challenges of being a director of photography is it's very difficult for me to send someone to represent my company to go shoot. The producers and creatives that call me want to work with me, and if I'm not available, they've got other DPs they also work with and are already comfortable. So for me to send someone that I'm confident in that the customer isn't, it's extremely rare that I get that opportunity. So with that said, on the charts here for 23 and 24, our customers 1 and 2 were the same for both years, but 3 and 4 are different customers. They were both existing customers from past years, but they were in like positions 6 and 9 in the past. So things shuffled around a little bit. Usually like my number 1 or number 2 change every year. I don't lose a customer. They just like, they were bigger one year and a little smaller the next year. So someone else takes the number 1 seat. But for the first time in a long time, number 1 and number 2 are the same for 2 years running. 10 years of total sales. So in 2024 it's 46. So going back to 14, I would have been 36 years old. I was grinding a lot harder in my 30s. Then 40s, I certainly made the conscious decision to throttle back a little bit. But also in the first half of this 10-year snapshot, as I keep mentioning, I was doing a lot more commercial work, broadcast 30-second, 15-second, even 2-minute commercials. And there were two outlying years for me career to date. 2016, I crushed it. And the same thing happened in 2010. 2010 was a big career pivot for me. I got into, it's kind of coming out of the 2008 recession. Prior to that, I was working on a lot of tech startup corporate videos, and then a lot of mortgage, like refi, home loan spots, because all these like mortgage companies during that great housing boom and what caused the GFC in 2008, most of those companies were based in Southern California, and they were all doing refi and mortgage commercials, like weekly new ads on the air based on the interest rates for that week. And I was plugged in with a couple of producers that were in that mortgage world. So we were crushing it. And then that all imploded in 2007, 2008. I did a bit of a pivot. 2010, and maybe I wish I had BTS and photos from that era of my career. I pivoted in 2010 and did a lot of long form direct response. So it was like infomercials, buy now for $19.95, 30-minute, hour-long infomercials, customer testimonials, product tabletop, product demos, car washing stuff, like wheel cleaner, car wax. It was a crazy year. And I stayed kind of steady in that DR world, 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14. And then 14 is about when I started pivoting back to getting the 30-second spot work that I had in the previous decade doing all the mortgage stuff. And then 2016, just schedule-wise, everything fell into place. It was rare that I got a second offer on a date I was already booked. It was just like back-to-back shooting jobs, 5-day, 7-day weeks, out on set. I would just walk off one set, on to the next one. Anyway, 2016, amazing year. And then you can see things kind of equalize and we're a little more sane. 17, 18, 19, and then, everything changed in 2020. And then post-2020, it's a new production environment, much like how I mentioned my first few years in my early 20s working in the business. All these jobs I had no longer exist from a technology standpoint. I feel like 2020 was that like delineation line again where everything's changed. There is not that mid-range broadcast spot work that existed in the previous decade. All right, this next chart is quite shocking. Same chart recalculated using the CPI inflation calculator from the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics. I'm super cynical on the formula because our federal government changes the algebra they use. It's not a consistent metric year over year. So they basically downplay inflation to hide how much printing of money essentially exists. So I would say inflation is far worse than this calculator indicates. But I was just standing in Home Depot buying some stuff for the house today, and candy bars are like $3.69 in the checkout. And I remember when I was a kid with my paper route, it was 50 cents for that same candy bar at the convenience store. So was that 6-7 times price increase over 40 years, 30, call it 35 years. So anyway, maybe let me rework these charts side by side or over under. Okay, so in actual dollars, I already knew I made more money per year in my 30s than I have in my 40s. But when you inflation adjust those past years, the gap gets even wider. And I know this is not unique to the media business. I mean, we have watched just the cost of gear and ease of use has changed radically in the past 10 years. 10 years ago, I was using a $120,000 camera to shoot 1920 by 1080. And now I can shoot 4K on my $1,000 iPhone that arguably looks better. And in a lot of cases, I get better content because it's so instantaneous and unobtrusive. Other trades are suffering from this as well. But I know also keeping in touch with some of my friends in Silicon Valley that work in tech, they're outpacing inflation there between the comp packages that are salary, RSUs, and other benefits. Those things have tracked beyond inflation. I mean, the money some of them are able to clear, good for them, but it's just shocking I'd love to have 1 year of tech wages and stock benefits from one of those companies. Often makes me wonder if when I was shooting videos for a venture capital firm in my early 20s, if I had stayed more focused on the tech side than the creative side. I passed on a job at a startup up in the San Jose area, my early 20s. Often do the I wonder what if I'd gone that direction instead. Well, at any rate, I love my career. I love what I do. It's frustrating that I can't clear the kind of wages that I did in my 30s, but I still love to shoot. I mean, that's, I guess, kind of the the dysfunction with all of this. The creative aspect of the trade is what keeps us all desired to do it, even when it's not as financially viable as it was in the past. Well, let's continue this discussion in the comments below. How was your year? I know a lot of people struggled last year. It worked out. I don't know, not from my own doing, other than saying yes and trying to have a good attitude every day. Just happened to work out, and I have no idea what's in store for me this coming year. It's January 2nd at the time of this record, and I have 2 jobs so far confirmed for the year. I'm hopeful that next Monday, seems like Mondays are my good days where I get hold inquiries for upcoming work. But yeah, hey, let's chat more in the comments below. Thanks.